No one in her town knew that the last time they saw Sophie Kay Elton would be the last time. What followed wasn't just a tragedy. It was confusion, heartbreak, and a search for answers that still hasn't stopped. This is the story of a young girl whose life touched many, and the night that changed everything. Before that night, before the confusion, the heartbreak, and the questions that still remain, there was just Sophie, a child whose life began like any other. Small moments, small joys, and a family who adored her. Sophie Kay Elton was born in 2011, in a town where people knew their neighbors by name and where childhood still felt simple. Her birth wasn't just the arrival of a baby. It was the beginning of a story filled with warmth, laughter, and all the ordinary moments that would later become precious memories. From the very start, Sophie had a spark that people often struggle to describe but never forget. Family members recall how her eyes seemed to follow everything: sunlight through the curtains, shadows on the wall, the soft faces leaning over her crib. She was curious, she was gentle, and she was awake to the world in a way children often are before life becomes complicated. As she grew into a toddler, Sophie developed habits everyone around her knew by heart. The tiny clap she did every time she discovered something new, the way she'd run barefoot across the yard even when the grass was wet, and her absolute refusal to sleep without her favorite purple blanket. Her early years were full of the things families sometimes take for granted: morning cartoons playing softly in the background, tiny handprints on foggy windows, birthday candles blown out too quickly, and afternoons spent coloring on the floor. Little pieces of life, moments that didn't feel important at the time, but now carry a weight the family never expected. Neighbors remember seeing Sophie toddle around with a plastic spoon and a toy cup, making tea for everyone who walked by. And even then, people say she had a kindness to her, the kind of kindness that makes adults pause, smile, and lean down to say hello. These were the beginnings that shaped Sophie. The quiet mornings, the messy afternoons, and the safe little world her family built around her. A world that felt steady, a world that felt whole, a world no one imagined would someday carry so much grief. And as she grew older, that spark only became brighter. By the time Sophie started school, that early spark everyone noticed had only grown brighter. She entered the world of classrooms, friendships, and discovery with the same wide-eyed curiosity she had as a toddler. But now, the world felt bigger to her, and she was ready to explore it. Sophie's teachers remember a child who didn't just pay attention, she absorbed everything. She asked the kind of questions that made adults smile, the kind of questions that reveal a mind always turning, always wondering about how things worked, why people felt what they felt, and what made the world the way it is. In class, she loved science days most. Whenever the teacher pulled out baking soda and vinegar or magnets or anything that bubbled or glowed, Sophie was front row, eyes wide, hands already half raised before instructions even finished. But school wasn't all science. Sophie had a soft heart, and it showed. She made friendship bracelets for classmates, not because it was a trend, but because she truly believed everyone deserved something colorful, something made just for them. Her friends say Sophie was the one who remembered birthdays, even the small ones. The one who shared her snacks without being asked. The one who held your hand when you were upset and quietly said, "It's okay, I'll stay with you." Outside of class, the world was her playground. Neighbors would often see Sophie walking to school with a backpack almost larger than she was, bouncing slightly with each step, ponytail swinging, waving at every familiar face she passed. She treated the walk like a parade, not a routine. Her laughter became something people recognized down the street, a bright, bubbly sound that floated through open windows in the morning. And yet, even in her joy, there was something thoughtful about her. She was the kind of child who stopped to pick up a fallen flower and hand it to her mom. The kind of child who whispered secrets to pets. The kind of child who kept notebooks filled with tiny doodles, ideas, and stories she hoped to finish someday. In many ways, these were the best years, the uncomplicated years. Safe routines, predictable mornings, and afternoons filled with small adventures. No one imagined that the same streets she skipped across would one day hold so much sorrow. For everyone who knew her, these memories of school days and childlike wonder are the ones that hurt the most, because they are the ones that remind them of everything that should have lasted longer. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, the kind of day where nothing remarkable happens, until suddenly, everything does. For Sophie Kay Elton, that morning began like any other, wrapped in the quiet routine of a family trying its best to stay afloat. The sun rose over the small neighborhood, soft, pale, almost hesitant, casting long shadows across the walls of the Elton home. Inside, Sophie moved through her room with the same gentle rhythm that had defined her childhood, touching her favorite photo frame, adjusting the little stuffed animal on her bed, humming a tune she had loved since she was 8. To anyone watching, she looked calm, peaceful, normal. But beneath that calmness lay something fragile, something easily shattered. Family members later recalled that Sophie seemed a little quieter that morning. Not sad, just distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere beyond the house, drifting through a place only she could see. For a girl who had grown up with so much love, yet so many invisible storms, this kind of silence wasn't unusual. But looking back, everyone wondered the same thing. Was that the sign? Was that the moment they missed? She walked downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and pushed her breakfast around without eating much. No argument, no laughter, no complaints. Just a soft, distracted stillness. To the people around her, it looked like a normal teenage mood swing. To the world, it was the prelude to tragedy. At 11:47 a.m., Sophie left the house. She didn't say where she was going. She didn't seem upset. She simply walked out the door and vanished into a day that would define the rest of the family's life. Neighbors saw her pass by, some waving, some catching a glimpse of that familiar soft smile. Nothing seemed out of place, but this was the last time anyone would see her alive. Time moved slowly at first. Her family expected her back within an hour, 2 at most, but Sophie didn't return. By mid-afternoon, concern began to bubble. By evening, panic replaced concern. Her mother called friends, neighbors, classmates, anyone who might have seen her. Phone calls turned into police reports. Police reports turned into search teams. Search teams turned into a nightmare unfolding in real time. And then came the moment every family dreads, the moment where hope and fear collide. At 8:16 p.m., emergency responders located a young girl. She was unresponsive, and the world of the Elton family collapsed. No one expected this. No one predicted it. A day that began with quiet routine had ended in tragedy so deep, so devastating, that it would echo through the entire community. News spread faster than anyone could control. Phones rang. Messages poured in. People gathered, trying to understand what had happened, trying to process how a bright 13-year-old girl with so much life ahead of her could be gone in a single day. Teachers cried. Friends broke down. Even strangers felt the weight of it. Because Sophie wasn't just another name in the news. She was a child loved deeply. A child who had been trying to find her place in a world that wasn't always gentle with sensitive hearts. And now, that world felt colder, quieter, incomplete. From this moment on, nothing in the Elton family's life would ever be the same. Every memory, every photo, every small detail of Sophie's life now carried a different meaning. Her story, once filled with dreams and growing hope, now turned into a battle for truth, understanding, and justice. The moment Sophie's body was discovered, everything became a question. Every detail, every second, every decision made that day. And in tragedies like this, the truth doesn't walk forward. It has to be chased. Emergency responders sealed off the area within minutes. Flashing lights cut through the darkness, casting long, fractured shadows across the ground. The air felt heavy, thick, as if the night itself understood the gravity of what had happened. Sophie's family waited nearby, silent, trembling, clinging to anything that could hold their collapsing world together. Detectives began their work immediately. Whenever a child is found deceased, the investigation begins at maximum intensity. Every assumption is questioned. Every possibility is considered. Because in cases like this, there is no room for mistakes. Detectives first retraced Sophie's steps. What time did she leave the house? Who saw her? What was her emotional state? They spoke to neighbors, classmates, anyone who might have interacted with her that day. At first, nothing unusual appeared. She had left quietly, calmly, without visible distress. But investigators knew that cases like these rarely reveal their truth immediately. They needed data, facts, patterns. They pulled CCTV footage from nearby streets, shops, bus stops, any angle that might have caught a glimpse of Sophie. They checked phone logs, social media activity, location pings. Every frame mattered. Every timestamp mattered. Because somewhere inside all that silence was the answer. As investigators dug deeper, they faced a harsh reality. Certain questions had to be asked, even if they hurt the family. Was Sophie struggling emotionally? Had something happened at school? Had she confided in anyone recently? Had there been signs that were missed? These weren't accusations. They were necessary threads in the web of truth. And with each interview, a picture began to form. Not complete, but clearer. Friends mentioned she had seemed overwhelmed recently. A teacher recalled a moment where Sophie appeared distracted and withdrawn. A family member mentioned she had been a bit off the past week, though they couldn't explain exactly why. Little details, scattered like broken glass. As news of her death spread, the community reacted in two ways. Some people came together, bringing food, offering help, lighting candles in vigils. Others whispered assumptions, theories, and rumors. In cases involving young victims, communities often fill the silence with speculation, but speculation can become a second tragedy. For the detectives, pressure increased by the hour. The media began circling. Social media exploded with posts demanding answers. Local officials demanded updates. And behind it all was the family, exhausted, shattered, desperate to know what had happened to their daughter. Detectives couldn't afford delays. They couldn't afford missteps. They needed clarity. And that clarity would come from only one place: forensic evidence. Hours turned to days. Days felt like months. Finally, the forensic team began releasing their findings. Slowly, carefully. Each detail mattered. Forensic analysis doesn't just show what happened. Sometimes, it reveals what didn't happen. The results painted a clearer picture of Sophie's final moments. Not every detail, not every explanation, but enough to guide investigators in the right direction. The evidence ruled out certain possibilities. Other possibilities grew stronger. The shape of the truth was forming. Investigators now had to answer the hardest questions. Why did this happen? What led Sophie to this moment? And who, if anyone, was responsible? Those answers wouldn't come easily. They searched through communications, diaries, school records, recent events, anything that could reveal the emotional landscape Sophie had been navigating. And slowly, painfully, they began to understand. Sophie had been carrying more than she ever let show. More confusion, more pressure, more silent battles. And then, just when the investigation seemed stuck, one piece of information emerged. A message, a conversation, a bit of digital activity that investigators had overlooked at first because it appeared insignificant. But it wasn't insignificant. It was the clue that would change the direction of the entire case. Sometimes investigations don't break open with dramatic revelations. Sometimes, all it takes is one overlooked message. The detectives regrouped. The timeline shifted. The focus narrowed. They were closing in on the truth. Days had passed since Sophie's death, yet for her family and the community, time felt frozen. Nothing moved forward. Not grief, not understanding, not life itself. But inside the investigation room, a different story was unfolding. Piece by piece, the truth was beginning to take shape. And when it finally arrived, it was both heartbreaking and painfully human. It began with the digital team, quiet analysts who spend their days digging through data trails most people never notice. One of them found something. Not dramatic, not shocking, just a small detail. A time-stamped message Sophie had sent earlier that week. Sometimes the biggest answers come from the smallest clues. The message hinted at emotional distress. Nothing loud, nothing alarming on the surface. But it carried an undercurrent of fear and confusion. Something had been weighing on her. Something she didn't fully understand. Something she didn't know how to express. Detectives widened their search, looking deeper into her recent interactions, online activity, and private conversations. And that's when another detail appeared. At first, it looked like normal teenage communication. Friends chatting after school, sharing memes, making plans. But one conversation stood out. A subtle shift in tone. A moment where Sophie seemed unusually quiet. A late-night text where she expressed feeling lost, tired, and not herself. Investigators connected this to recent comments from her friends, how she had seemed withdrawn, distracted, overwhelmed. And suddenly, the pieces aligned. This wasn't about one moment. This was about weeks of silent struggle. Through interviews, messages, and patterns, detectives began to understand the truth. Sophie had been dealing with emotional turmoil that she never fully shared. Maybe it was school pressure. Maybe social confusion. Maybe feeling misunderstood. Maybe fears she couldn't articulate. But whatever it was, it grew quietly, like a storm building behind a closed door. So often, the people who smile the most are carrying the heaviest battles. After weeks of exhausting investigation, forensic testing, and expert review, the detectives reached their conclusion. There was no evidence of external harm, no sign of an attacker, no indication of a crime. This wasn't something done to Sophie. It was something happening within her. Her passing was ruled a tragic, self-inflicted act born from emotional overwhelm and inner confusion. A decision made in a moment where she felt trapped inside her own thoughts. The truth wasn't violent, but it was devastating. When investigators presented their findings to her family, the room fell into a silence so deep it felt physical. Because in the end, the hardest truth to accept is the one that has no villain, only pain. Sophie's parents were shattered, not because the truth brought guilt or blame, but because it brought clarity. Clarity that she had been struggling quietly. Clarity that she hadn't wanted to burden anyone. Clarity that her heartbreak had remained invisible until it was too late. They hadn't failed her. They had loved her. But sometimes love isn't enough to see what someone keeps hidden in the shadows. When the findings were shared publicly, the community was split. Some people were relieved there was no danger to others. Others were confused, searching for someone, anyone, to blame. Some couldn't accept the explanation, believing there had to be a darker cause. But the investigators stood firm. The evidence was clear. Sophie's struggle had been internal, invisible, and deeply personal. The truth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It didn't involve villains or conspiracies. It involved something far more common and far more dangerous: silent, emotional struggle. The final moments of someone's life rarely begin in the moment they're lost. They begin in the quiet days before, in the thoughts they never say out loud, in the pain they hide behind a smile. And because of that, Sophie's story became more than a tragedy. It became a warning, a reminder, a message. The truth had come to light, but it brought a heavier message with it. That even the brightest, kindest, gentlest hearts can suffer quietly in ways we do not see. As the investigation closed, one chapter ended, but a new one began. One where Sophie's family worked to transform their grief into something meaningful. A legacy, a voice for other young people, a mission to ensure no other family faces the same silence.